mentioned, man, this Zoom window is driving me nuts. All I mentioned is there's the updated research essay due date on the schedule. And so project 2 page here, I just added all of that stuff under the deliverables section. So I outlined it here in pretty good detail. You know, this is pretty decently long. This is really just setting the precedent for wrangling you guys back into a little bit more of a formal writing process. I'm still not going to be super critical on grammar as far as points go, you know. The really big components here are finding a topic that's relatable, being specific about it. What are you learning about this topic through this research? And then how are you applying that to ultimately, like how you're going to apply that to your project and so forth down the road. So you're going to choose a topic. Hopefully you've already chosen it that overlaps between your project and your partners, right? That's evident. That's what I assigned from the beginning. Again, it should be either like a scholarly article or some well-known source like, you know, Vice News or New York Times, something, you know, recognizable, or a podcast or some sort of professional video source like a TED Talk, right? Something that's creditable. You know, this is all up to your discretion, but the point here is not to like waste your time. It's for you guys to like really find something that you're interested in. So it shouldn't be really work. It should be like, you know, a hobby more or less of figuring out something that you're interested in and learn something about it. So this, the writing, the word count is going to shrink as we go along towards the end of the semester for each of these. Because I'm giving you guys a lot of specifics here for the first time, I didn't change it a whole lot. Just as we go, as it shrinks in scale, you guys will notice that you have to be a little bit more specific, more concise with the writing. So it's kind of like an acquired, you know, skill set that you kind of have to keep working towards. So biggest thing that I found was a lot of people wrote so far that I've covered, a lot of people wrote these essays about their project. A lot of people didn't even cover the research topic at all. I'm not necessarily going to dock people for that, all of that, right? As I said, it should be more of a ramble. And but I'm specifically outlining here that these are really research topics, right? So you're going to be going through, and I want you all to have kind of a similar structure just so it's easier for me to tackle, but really also if you only have a limited number of words, like it's probably what you're better off going for. So your intro paragraph, you should have a clearly defined thesis statement. A lot of people didn't with theirs. And I understand that most people wrote their individual essays, right? And then sometimes some had an intro and a conclusion or something. But with that, it's a little hard to pinpoint a thesis for two separate papers, more or less, right? So what all of this is trying to do is get you into the mindset of like the end paper and essay is really like a collaborative single document, not like a jump back and forth kind of thing. So clearly defined kind of point in your intro that's going to be telling us what all the paragraphs below are going to be. I'd say probably like 3 paragraphs, body paragraphs. Each of them should begin with a topic sentence. A lot of you also didn't really have topic sentences, at least the ones I covered so far. You know, this is just a general basic overview of writing. Each paragraph should have its own description of what the paragraph's going to be. And then conclusion, you're going to reconnect to your thesis statement, obviously, right? This is, I've heard this a billion times. But at the end, if you want to, right, you could start to tune this into your project, right? Like, how is this research gonna, what's like the single most fundamental component of how this research might influence the approach you take in this project? And so I want you guys to try to strive for this not using the word I, and instead use things like we if you're being collaborative, right? In the end, if anybody reads this, it should be like, we should know that it's a collaborative writing assignment, right? It shouldn't be back and forth. And with that being said, if you guys have thoughts at the very end towards like relating it to your individual projects, I wrote like an example here so you guys can have like some semblance of, you know, how you might say that without using I, or, you know, oh, I'm Bernard and I think this. You simply could just put one of us will be focusing on blank to incorporate because blank, the other will bring up whatever, right? It's just a very generalized way of overviewing it, but that's really the main point here is you went out, you did this research, you're focusing on all these different topics of this research, you know, A, B, C, and then how are you bringing that back to thinking about your project? It should be fairly simple, straightforward, not too long. The point is here is I'm trying to just have you guys be a little bit more structured with it. So the bigger, I think the bigger kind of concern as you guys get into this is really just going to be the approach you're going to be taking towards like this collaboration. Like, how do you write this out, right? And like developing strategies. So one approach I might take, or have you guys suggest that you guys take, is, you know, assuming that you have a source that abides by like what I'm expecting, that I was requesting, and you've already watched it, read it, listened to it, kind of connect with your partner and be like, oh, okay, well, you know, these are the points I'm thinking about talking about. And you find out what the points are that your partner wants to talk about. You guys can write them individually still, but it's then when you come together to kind of compile this stuff, might start to be like the challenging component, right? So I would normally recommend just doing the body paragraphs separately. And then once you have them pieced together, then you can just plop in your intro and conclusion. And the only other thing I said to the other classes, I do hope you guys review each other's own writing, right? Because this should be like a unified document. However, you want to make sure you're not overstepping your boundaries, right? You want to make sure you're collaborating and not like dictating or something. So if you're both going to say, okay, I think I'm ready for you to review this, right? You kind of make sure each other's ready to make changes. So, because like if you're using a group Google Doc and, you know, you're changing this in real time and somebody like alters a bunch of your writing, like, are you going to remember what you had there? Are you going to approve it? Or are you not going to approve it? Right. So we want to avoid that kind of frustration. So what I would probably recommend is like doing whatever little bit of writing you guys will each focus on, save that, and then make your shared document so you have a semblance of like what you started with, right? Just like saving versions of a image. So again, I guess this is all, it should all go fairly quickly. I think that this first one that I'm asking for a little bit more focus it'll probably take you guys a little bit of time in developing these strategies. So I can foresee it being a little frustrating if this is the first time you're doing it. So again, I guess focus points here are that I'm hoping you guys get more insight into areas of focus that you're interested in. You know, we're like UB is a research institution, so it's good to have these skills. A little bit of skills in writing about your thoughts and like this sense of art. And connecting with your peers, right? We're all sitting in our freaking houses all the time and we don't really do a whole lot. So being able to talk with the people back and forth on these different thoughts are, you know, I think is more beneficial as of right now than studying vocab words for a quiz. So hopefully this will be pretty good. Does anybody have questions with all of that? It's a little lengthy. All right. And then I did add like a little bit more of a detail for our classroom discussions. Like once we get into stuff next class, right? So hopefully you guys have gone through that research that you've done to have a general idea of like what things you're taking away from it already. And so next class, when we talk about sketches, you know, you're going to present for your, you know, somebody else in the class like we did the first time. Obviously you want to give us the main aspects of their project, right? Like, oh, their political point is this, or technology point's this, how they're hoping to use type as image. These are just general overview parts of the project. Any other relevant desired design stuff, this is all general, right? So if we're having like 2.5 minutes to talk about each other's, like deliver this to the class. So not only are you giving us that overview of their sketches and their concept, but then you're going to discuss how this relates to your research that you're starting, right? That you're diving into. And this isn't, you don't need any writing done at this point. This is just like, you've reviewed it, you have these different thoughts going through your head. And so not how this relates to the research, not how it relates to your project. We're talking about the research, right? That was another little trip up we had. So within this respect of making sure we're kind of giving some meaningful thoughts, I am working on, I'm hopefully going to be able to finish this, excuse me, this evening, is I've been going through and reviewing your discussions, right? Like your presentations. And I've been labeling them as chapters in YouTube. This is the first time I've done it. So I think this might be helpful. So now that you have this kind of generalized new expectation, you probably should cover for yourself. If you want to, you could go back to the first one and see how you presented for the first one. Now knowing the expectations, and you could use that as a reference to like, what did I talk about? What did I not talk about at all? Right? You get if you want, this is up to you. I'm just kind of, I thought it could be helpful for some of you. Some people like to have that reference point. So yeah, how it relates to your research. And so we're just going to be, all I'm expecting you guys to do is give it like an example of how that that point is, how you're articulating it to like talking about your peers' work. And then after you've presented their sketches, their concept, you brought up a related research topic. You must, give an idea, right? We're all talking about each other's projects to ultimately like give each other some thoughts, some inspiration. So, you know, kinds of thoughts you might have when you're talking one-on-one in the breakout groups, maybe reserve some of that to thinking through like how you're going to structure a nice kind of overview idea to them here. So like, oh, now knowing this, you know, this research that I just delivered to you guys, I think that this topic could be helpful in upholding their goal because of this reason. And yeah, and then this last point is just really starting to think of like, oh, we're all people and we're all helping each other out. So it's starting to kind of try to get that sense of responsibility of like, if you're leading a conversation like I am now, right? You would then you'd give these cues to like welcome everybody else. Does anybody have thoughts? Okay, now that I gave this example, does anybody have any, you know, thoughts towards my example, or does anybody have any, you know, questions about their sketches? Kind of like taking me out of that role so I can focus on underlying concerns, keeping track of time, these different things. But this is really a nice trait to develop, though. It's kind of like not quite leadership skills, but just being able to have conversations. It's not like a bunch of effort. It's just like, hopefully you guys can do that. Is this making sense? This is kind of like in my mind, the ways in which I'm hoping it to be going, but I really didn't want to throw all this at you right off the bat for the first thing. Maybe I should have, maybe that's some kind of feedback I could take if you guys have thoughts towards it, but okay. Yeah, so again, if you feel like you may not have chose the right research thing, like quite literally, some people for the first project, their research topic was one single photo with no text or anything. So, you know, if you didn't grab something that's going to work, probably be good to pick up that today so you can you know, read through a little bit of that or listen to it before Wednesday, just so you have some points to talk about. And so as we go forward, this general sense will be the same way we're going to be approaching project 3, I think. And definitely project 4. Project 3 is a little bit of a curveball for me because we normally don't take as much time and we don't really review sketches for audio, right? And we don't really have a critique for audio as of right now. I mean, I probably could incorporate it, but my general sense of audio, at least for this level, is just being able to harness the ability of recording and being able to edit. It's not too in depth in terms of building out this really critically focused, structured, you know, musical piece, conducted piece. It's really just to explore how can you alter audio, and then doing a little bit of a quick project for that. And then the fourth project will be coding, but we will also need to be implementing audio. So having that ability to modify audio is really the end goal. It's not to be more critical like we are with these visual projects. So my thought right now, just so you guys have an idea, is here, maybe I'll go here since I'm recording this as well. Oops, probably could have went to the other one. The grading breakdown here I have the project 3 having a partner-based research paper. I'll keep that. I don't think that's a problem, but I don't think there's going to be a delivery. So I'll probably just have to tweak, you know, a couple of points here or there, whatever, just to make that make more sense. So bigger thing for today is, does everybody have Adobe Illustrator installed? Does anybody not? I think hopefully it was apparent that we were going into it, but I didn't specifically remind everybody. So everybody has it. Okay. I just want to make sure that we're not going to hold up for a minute. Definitely want to launch that and make sure that it's coming up. And also, I want you guys to head to the exercise 2 page because there is a practice file there. This practice file is more so for beginning users for use of the pen tool and reviewing like the base. Today, all we're going to be doing with this exercise is the components that cover the base elements of vectors and how to create vectors and modify vectors, and starting to grasp being able to convert things like type and images from either like a smart object or you know, a raster based image into vectors, into these plotted points that we can modify in a different way than we would with raster. And then next week, Monday, we'll get into things like modifying objects with one another and so forth. Okay, somebody left a package. Yeah, because I spent a bunch of time at the beginning of class today with filling everybody in with the updates on the research stuff. So I full-heartedly know that I won't get through everything with the exercise. That's good. At least we'll. The other concern I've only heard from one person, from some insight, was that some people may or may not have realized that these exercises are like follow along in class. So definitely want to walk through them as I'm walking through them. So if you're concerned or confused about something, I can help you out, ask questions. Also, another point from that concern was that seemed like some people, since you guys are like talking in groups right outside of class, which is a good thing, and you guys are talking to each other, some of you had like this frustration, maybe with the beginning writing assignment, which is fine, or the Photoshop project, like not being able to do the Photoshop project in its full entirety because you weren't, you're not accustomed to it yet, or you didn't learn enough of it yet. What I really want to refocus on for you guys is the notion that everything that we cover in the exercise is really the only things you need to know for making a successful project. Because there's a lot you can do with what we cover. A lot of specifics that you can keep like refining and playing with. And mind you, it's not just the technical ability of the program. We're also equally focusing on your concept, right? And building that concept out. And so a lot of this project is really just conveying that idea, and that it doesn't need to be super complex use of the tools. Obviously, if you have used these tools before, you can continue onward and strive to like learn some new stuff. But so as we go along, if you guys have questions on the exercise, for sure, call them out. I don't have my chat window open during days like today. So just shout out if you have a question or if you want me to repeat something, something's not working. Could be good to take down notes, a quick like note here or there. Because as I mentioned before, like if you're on a Mac, you could always search in the program for a specific name of a tool. And I have this recorded. So if you forget how to do something, you know, you can come back here. One of the topics of grading for the project is like diversity of tools used in creating your image, right? So as an example, if you use 80% of all the tools that I cover in here, especially a couple of the more of the complex ones to show like you're up to par with some of those, that's what I'm looking for. That's all I'm looking for. So you don't need to necessarily know every single component of the program. These programs they get really complex as time goes on. So there's a lot. Like Photoshop, you can edit video. Who the heck's gonna do that? So the first thing we wanna do is grab this, let me go back to it. On the exercise 2 page, there is a practice file. So if you're new, you want a recap of using the pen tool, we're going to download that practice file. I would probably avoid the PDF if you can. That's just a backup. Get the practice file and then open that up. And I'm going to do Command-0 to get this.
It gave me an error. It says Postscript conversion error.
You might have downloaded the PDF. So I made this back when CS6 was the mainstream, and the PDF was a backup, but it kind of seems like now there's a problem with that conversion for some reason.
I can see the PDF. It's the other one that it gave me a problem with. That one, yeah.
Is this the first time you're opening Illustrator?
I'm on the school computer, so yeah.
Yeah, you might just need to do a full quit, you know, like quit the application and relaunch it.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes there's goofy things when you first launch. Yep. Is there anybody else that's
sorry, where is the practice folder?
So on our home site, we've got the exercise 2 page.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of intro stuff, and we scroll down a little bit. The practice file is there. Should probably just put it at the top. I don't know. I harvested this tutorial from Dominic Licata in the art department a few years ago. So it's kind of just under his structure. So with this opened, I'll go ahead and kind of give us all a basic overview of Illustrator. And again, this should be really all the insight you really need to know for this program. And obviously you'll experiment with some of the tools, some of the options and so forth as you go along. But everything we cover here that's in this video should be all you need. So on the left, we have all of our basic tools. We do have some additional tools as well that are not set out by default. So I think it might be good to set those in now while we're all together. So if we see at the bottom here, there's a little 3 dot for edit toolbar. If we click on that, it'll show everything that, like everything grayed out is already everything that we have set, right? And it'll show you, it'll like highlight for you where that tool is. So even if it's like in a tool folder, right, like drop down arrow, it'll show you where. So other tools that you might want to drag out that might not be there by default are, let me scroll because mine are already grayed out. Down under type, you might want to have the vertical area type tool. So you can, I would drag that and hover it over the type tool, and you basically like, you know, plop that as an additional tool in that category. Same thing with vertical type on a path. Those are things to experiment with. They might be helpful since we're dealing with type. So you put that in the type tool as well. And then the other thing was under modify, right, towards the bottom. I pulled two things out as well. There's a bunch more though, but the ones that I pulled out are warp and twirl. And I just put them right at the bottom here, right there. You could put them together. It doesn't, this is all modifiable, you know. But yeah, there are a couple additional tools. You could pull them all out if you want. I don't, you know, it's up to you. So you can collapse that. I think you just have to click off of it or click the thing again. So that's our tool panel, right? Kind of customizable if you need. The top here, I am referring to as the options panel still. This is probably not here on a lot of your machines right now, right? A lot of you might not even see this. You would have to go and set your layout to be the same as mine. So that's the second thing I want us to all do at the same time. If you're on a machine in the computer lab, you might have to do this for each new computer. You go to Window, Workspace, and instead of Essentials, select Typography. And I'm going to reset typography so that it shows up the same way for all of us. Okay. And since this is a similar mindset as in Photoshop, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on describing it. I want you guys to follow along with setting it up the way I think might be most helpful. So
I'm so sorry. Could you go through that window thing one more time?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. No, you're good. It's under Window and Workspace. So this should be like presets that you can do in all of Adobe programs, at least the ones that I've used. Yeah, and because we're dealing with type heavily, it could be nice to start with this. And for some reason, I'm pretty sure, no, see, it's still here. The options panel is still here. I don't know, if some people had a problem with not having this in the past. I don't know why.
I don't have it.
Yeah, see, I don't know how to turn that on.
It just says, you said it was under Workspace. It just says 3D like motion painting. It goes up to graphic and web.
Wait, what? You don't have all these options?
I don't have typography.
Oh. Are you on a school computer?
No, I'm on my Mac.
Oh, okay. If you go to Illustrator, About Illustrator, what version is it at the top?
I'm sorry, could you do that again?
Yep. You just go to the name of the program and then About.
Let me see. It's 22.2. That's.
It could be helpful to update maybe. You might be missing some some files or libraries or something like that. You don't have to do that right now. I think you just do that through the Adobe updater tool or the Creative Cloud the Creative Cloud application.
Okay.
You should be able to open that up and then manually just update Illustrator. So everything else should be good though. So let's go ahead and modify some of this stuff over here. I want you guys to right click on these following things and close them. So we're going to close the properties tab, the libraries tab.
Somebody else in chat's also saying that they don't have typography.
Yeah, if you guys could speak this stuff out, because I don't have my chat open. Yeah, if you don't have typography, I'm assuming maybe you just need an update. I'm not for sure. If you don't have it still by next Monday, or like the big thing is just having the options panel at the top, because everything else
is old, so I don't know if I'll even be able to update it.
What's that?
Like, I have an old computer.
Right, yeah, so you might not be able to. Yeah, if you still don't have this by next Monday, I'll hopefully, I'm just gonna write a note, I guess. I'll try to see if there's a toggle on for it. I've just never had to deal with it myself, so.
Okay.
Toggle options bar. So in your case, you might want to just leave on the properties panel, because some of that stuff is also in the options panel. So if you don't have the options panel, like maybe just keep that open. But for everybody else, I would just have the layers on the bottom. If you tab over this expanded panels, we could bring over like keep character and paragraph as our two primary kind of like type tools. The open type we can close. Character styles, character and paragraph styles. These are like if you're doing a larger document, you can set defaults. You know, so like some paragraphs have certain characteristics. You can close those things. You can close appearance, and probably could keep transparency if you want, and close artboards. So I kind of just have things right here if you want to take a quick look. I kind of just went through fast. These are the really only things we need for today. On Monday, we'll open a few others, like add a few other pieces. But this should strip it down so it's a little less cumbersome, less confusing. You know, we just have, I'm going to close up properties. I always have layers on the bottom, just because like in Photoshop, I have them in the same spot. So, okay. First thing this today is going to be covering is the pen tool. And it is a little confusing first time using. The pen tool in this program is essentially a means to creating either lines, or if you complete a line to the endpoint that you started, a shape, right? So it's similar to the process that we use in Photoshop where we're creating a path with the pen tool, except the end of that process was to make a selection and to be able to save that path to keep making that same selection. Whereas here in Illustrator, the pen tool is used to create content, right? We're actually making vectors with this. So we're gonna go down through like 1 through 4 here and just replicate this. So first thing I want us to do though, is we'll look at the layers panel. We'll see that the locked shapes layer is actually not locked. I don't know why by default. So we're just gonna click that on, the little lock on. And so now we can't modify that. So if we're on the lock shapes layer and we go to grab the pen tool, just the plain pen tool, right? You'll notice that you are going to get this little cross, like you're not able to draw on this layer. You can click all you want, it's not going to do anything. You have to be on the layer that you're wanting to draw. right? So it's a little bit similar to Photoshop, but also a little not. Photoshop's layering is a little different. The layers here in Illustrator are very particular, and we'll keep making sure that it's understandable as we go into next week as well. So with the practice layer selected, we're just going to go through and replicate this. I think by default, you guys might have like a color as the fill. So I'm just going to have that. So if we just click in this top left vector point, just click and let go. If we drag or we move our mouse out now, you'll see that there's a straight line coming from that, right? This is what happens when we click and let go. Just a simple click. It allows us to create sharp lines. So as we go down here, if we also click and let go, right, we get a sharp point. So this might be, it might seem repetitive to be doing this, but it does show you the fact that if you don't get right on, it's not going to be super accurate, whatever.
Would it be clicking to be able to do that?
I just have these as guides for you guys. So the little points on lines, right, on the guideline. Does that answer your question?
I'm just currently unable to drag any lines. Like I'm clicking the anchor points, but
Are you on the practice layer?
yeah.
Yep. And so if you just click and let go, that doesn't make a point.
No, not getting anything.
Are you on the pen tool?
Just double check. Okay, now I am.
Yep.
Yep,
Yep.
that did it. That's what I needed.
Yep. Yeah, and then this one's just that quick example of showing us that we can make sharp lines, like a square or whatever, by just clicking and letting go. And once we get to the end, since that was just a guide, it doesn't know to stop, right? It's just going to assume we're going to keep making points. So if we do want to stop, we just hit escape. It's a quick way to just get out of that. And I think by default, most of you probably have a color in here right now. And so this is a kind of a pretty important factor to be grasping onto as we go along with Illustrator, that because we just made these points, but we didn't go back to the beginning and complete a full shape, this is now currently with a color, it's currently considered an open object. We can't modify it in the same way we could do other objects. So because we really don't even want it to be a fill color right now, we should go down here and just flip this little toggle. It swaps the stroke and the fill. And assuming you had nothing as the fill, like a line, right? Like a crosshair line, we should just now have a line. And if we go back to our selection tool and we click off, right? We should see that new color come up, right, over top. So I guess the point here that I'm trying to make is that there's no stroke where I didn't put a stroke. Like I didn't connect all the way to the beginning, so there's no line there. Maybe if I don't need you guys to do this, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to put a stroke color of blue and make that stroke color larger. You see how there's no line on the top? Because I never clicked back to the origin point, right? This wasn't designed to be a shape. It was just designed to be a stroke. So in reality, this fill color has no business being there. But I think it's important to show you guys that if you don't connect an object back to the beginning, you are dealing with only a partial object, which could lead to problems. We can get to that if it comes up, but just pointing it out, because then, you know, we all have to learn our own ways of problem solving. And if you're stumbling on something and you realize, oh, you know what, it's not complete, maybe that's why. Because we could make it a complete object if we need to. Anyway, let's go back here. So if we grab the pen tool again, we'll go on to step 2. And for this one, I think we probably need to zoom in a little bit at the beginning here, because we do have these little arms that are coming off. Sometimes I call them arms. They're considered to be Bezier curves, is the formal name. They are indicators of a curved line, and they also have, they're controllable. So they're an additional element that you can use to modify the line. So not only like will we be able to move the vector point, but we could also adjust the curve of the line afterwards by adjusting that Bezier curve. So this example is just establishing a curved line with these Bezier curves. And so I think the best way, I just learned last class to describe this, is being very articulate in how to approach this. So with the basic pen tool, I'm going to click down one time and hold down on my first click. And while holding down on that first click, I'm going to drag over using that guide. And when I'm at the end of that guide, I'm going to let go of my first click. Right? That's all one click. So it's kind of like if you grab a file on your desktop and you're dragging it. Only here, not only are we moving something, but we're also creating it in the same step. Right? We're creating a point while modifying the point. It's a little finicky to think about until you do it a few times. But now, if you were to move your cursor, you can see that that is giving you a preview of that curved line now, rather than a straight edge. And so we're just repeating that same step for each of these points. We're clicking down a second time here and holding the second click, dragging out, and then at the end of that, releasing the second click. Right? And if you get it fairly close to those guide markers that I created, it should follow along pretty similarly. Then if you get to the end and you can't see much further over, just like Photoshop, pretty much whatever tool you're on, except the text tool, we can use the space bar to then move our page over while we're zoomed in. And we can continue clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging. Right? And again, once we get to the end, we just hit escape. Okay. Anybody stuck? I think the whole specifying, I'm clicking with the first click and releasing the first click, I think that's a little bit more helpful than.
Bernard.
Yeah.
If you don't get the curves right, like the first time, like, can you go back and like adjust it?
Yeah, we'll be talking about that once we leave this little
Right.
file.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so it's kind of like using a pencil. You know, you can draw something out. You don't have to be super precise because you can go back and erase, but you still have to give effort in going back and erasing. So usually you kind of want to set the precedent while you go, be somewhat accurate with whatever it is you're doing. You're not going to have guides for everything. But yeah, you always have that modification ability. So we're going to step 3. Same as step 1, we're just clicking and releasing, and we're going all the way around, right? The point here is that once we get to the end, which is also the beginning, once we hover over that beginning spot, we have a little circle indicator, just like we did in Photoshop's pen tool, right? That's indicative of like completing a shape, right? And once we click that, if we move away, we're not getting that extension to come out any further of creating a new shape or creating another vector point from the previous point, because the program knows we have ended that point to complete a unified shape. And yeah, I mean, you can go in and you could change the color, you could change the stroke. I think it's nice to see here as an example that if you were to click your selection tool and you deselect, if you click off and you click back on your shape, all of a sudden you'll get the options panel to give you those options for that shape. I'm not sure why it doesn't give you that by default, just when you switch to the selection tool, but I don't code this thing. Once you have those options there with your selection, you could actually change your stroke weight, how thick that stroke is. You have some other options for stroke, like changing the uniformity. These are like just real simple things that you can throw in for some reason. What's interesting here to note, if I can real quick, is that you see, we can still see our vector lines, right? And the color of those vector lines, like the outline of it, is actually the same color as what you have in your layers panel. Like if you double click on a layer, you could actually change that color. So whatever that color is, you get that preview of those vector lines. But for some reason, because we expanded the stroke goes beyond those lines, right? So what's interesting here to note is that even though we have that perception of it's a thicker line, the vector itself is still just a pin line, right? So the way we could actually see that would be if we go to View, Outlines, we actually can see just the vector points and the lines that are connecting between those points, right? So even though we have a thicker stroke, that stroke doesn't institute or like establish an object. It's still just a stroke. So it's another kind of interesting component of this program is that we would have to be specific, right? Like we could, I don't want you guys to follow this. I'm just giving you an example. We could expand this into a shape, right? And then that shape itself, you know, we could create like new outlines, new stroke. And then if we view outlines for that, we would see there is actual more. So as we go along, there's always ability to continue modifying and changing things, but it's helpful to know like each step of the process you're in, right? This is kind of like a new language for most of you. So when we're dealing with vector points, we're establishing these points. They literally are just points. And then these curved lines or straight lines between points. Everything else we're seeing is just a graphical user interface. And we have the ability to like, you know, set those parameters. Okay. So fourth step, similar as step 2, we're clicking and dragging. So I'm clicking my first click, dragging over to the end and releasing the first click. And you might have to be zoomed in if you don't see the lines well. So we repeat that the whole way around. One of these is the guide is in the wrong direction. So you kind of have to just follow your preview line that you get for around the circle. Right? And then same thing as step 3, we're clicking on the very last point, which is our 4th click. But on this 4th click, we're still dragging out and releasing the 4th click. Right? So actually, I'm going to start over and see something. I'm thinking the first click might not even necessarily need to be dragged out because, oh, nope, it does. I was thinking, oh, the last point's going to modify that curved line on the first one. It does not. All of them have to be dragged. Which is kind of interesting because once we start in the next process, once we start to get into modifying things, moving a curved handle on one side will affect the other side of a point. But it looks like it doesn't here because we didn't have a handle on one of the points, or I didn't. Anybody have questions yet? I'm just like completing this.
I am lost with number 4 and also number 2, but I can't drag it correctly. So if you could go over that again, that'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's this process of like, so there's 4 of these points, right? We're only clicking 4 times. It's just that on each of those clicks, we're holding down. So we're going to hold down on the first click. And while we're holding down, we're dragging the first click to the end of that guide. And then we're releasing that first click. Right? And then once we do that, you should see that that line should start to be curved now instead of straight. It is goofy until you do it a few times. Once you get it down, this is what I described to somebody in my first class. It's like, it's kind of like air. It's like describing somebody how to breathe. You know, it's like, how do you describe to somebody how breathing works? Just, you know, it's like kind of one of those things that you just, once you get, you get. So yeah, that's just the same process. You go around the whole thing. Is that making sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's just trying to be specific and articulating the specifics of the click. It's a fancy click. Okay. So we could just close this. We don't have to save it. We're going to create a new project window here for our exercise. So we'll just go to create new. And just like Photoshop, most of you, if you have the same version, should have the option of going through different presets. You know, for today's purpose, it doesn't matter. We could just do like web common. That's fine. You know, we do have the option to go in here and manually choose what our specifics are if we want to. We're also able to set our, in the advanced options, we're also able to set our raster effects, right? Which is visualizing these vector points in pixels. And so if you're creating like web content, screen content, you really only need 72. If you know you're going to be printing, you probably want 300 so that when you export it, it's going to export that higher quality. And that's all we need to cover really. Bleed, I'll also talk about this. I'll just set mine, but you guys just hit create. And since I set a bleed of like 0.25 inches, you can see there's the black line that retains the white canvas. That's your border, your boundary line. This red line, if you set a bleed, is literally another element to have communication with printers, to allow printers to know that anything up until that bleed line will be printed. And then the border is, kind of like the bounds of the document size. So like if this was a letter document, it'd be 8.5 wide by 11 inches long and with the black, but then the red extends beyond that. If you want to print the entire front of a page, like a poster, and not have to cut off access of white on the outside edges. This kind of file, like a full bleed kind of file, you will need to know how to make if you're going to be sending anything to print, like business cards, if you make your own business cards, or flyers, handout posters, anything that you're going to print or have somebody print for you, you'll want to have a full bleed set. So it's worth mentioning. So okay, so we should be pretty well set so far on being oriented, right, to Illustrator. We got down kind of the intro of the understanding of vectors, right? And these are like these basic building blocks of the program, right, of this project. And ultimately, when you go to submit your stuff, pretty much everything should be in vector form. So even if you bring an image in to use an image, you'll be using that to modify into vectors, or as anything that we see in your final image should be vectors, basically. So we're going to skip over to creating some type now, and then we're going to backtrack back into the vector format of the type. So first thing we'll want to do is grab the regular type tool, right? And we could just click just to start typing, but I prefer you guys just click and drag and make a text box. Then just make one kind of like almost the width of the canvas here. We're just going to go nice and big. It'll do placeholder text, and it's just in Latin. Doesn't matter. It's already highlighted, so we don't have to hit delete or anything. We just need to type. I want you guys to just type a word, right? So let's see. I'm going to type pickles. And once you have a word typed, right, like anything you want, go ahead and select it. And then we're going to change the size because we want this to be blown up more to fill the space more. So first thing I normally recommend is just like selecting the font size. You should have the character panel here, right? And you should select that point size. Just go something large. I'm going to try 250. That's pretty close. And then once you get it kind of close, almost to the size of the scale of your window, you can either click on the little arrows up or down, or my favorite, any of these boxes that have values, right? And pretty much any Adobe application now, you could just click in the box anywhere, right? Like your indicators, your cursors in there. Then you could just use the up or down arrow keys and change the scale manually, right? So I like to get it close and then fine tune it with just arrow keys rather than like, having it be annoying. Okay. And you don't have to have it go all the way to the edge because I'm going to have you guys now do some adjustments with this. And if you use, different fonts and stuff, sometimes the fonts will expand beyond the box. So your word no longer fits. So you might have to scale things down accordingly. But so I want you guys to take like a few minutes here and go through and make different selections with individual letters. And I want you guys to experiment with the different tools that we have access to, because not only do we have the option of changing the different fonts, right? Different typefaces that we have available to us. And you see some of these I'm hovering on and I just get a white preview. It's because my text is too large to fit now with some of them. So if you get into that problem, it might be better just to like shrink all this down a bit. But yeah, I want you guys to go through, select individual letters, do some experiments with different typefaces, different weights, right? We don't go super in depth with typography, but one really nice thing to keep in mind in the back of your brain is that when you're choosing types for a layout, it's generally good to have type that has multiple weights to it, right? Like this one has only one weight. That's not very diverse, right? Whereas this one I like to use a lot, ITC Avant-Garde Gothic Pro. It tells you how many versions are there, you know, in parentheses. And so by having that ability to manipulate it into different fonts or different weights or styles, that helps your design process. The rule of thumb when you're designing like a layout for something is you usually want like 2 typefaces. It's a good rule of thumb. And a lot of times you can pick one that has a sans serif and one that's a serif. And usually, depending on which one you start with, you have to kind of go through the process of determining, well, what's the other one that's going to pair well, right? Like you wouldn't pick like an old timey looking font and then pick like a, you know, a wedding scripted font that you'd use like in a wedding invitation, right? So that's the whole design process. But as you do go through that process, it can be helpful to note that you generally want to pick stuff that has more weights available. So not only are you picking typefaces, I want you guys to experiment with these other features, specifically with tracking and baseline shift and even some varying scale. Changing the, you could do rotation, doesn't matter. Changing the vertical scale and the horizontal scale. These are, you guys really have free roam because we're really modifying this type in any ways that we want. But if you were to create this type as just using as type, you generally want to stay away from modifying the integrity of the original typeface. So like, say I pick a font that doesn't have a bold option, but I want it to be bold. Oh, well, I'll just increase the scale of the horizontal scale. Yeah, kinda. But in the type world, they consider that to be bastardizing type. That's the technical term we'd use. You're taking it away from its original designer, like parent that created that type, right? This is kind of whole design notion of if you're using things from other people, you know, how are you modifying it in that way? So yeah, I guess the goal here with another minute or so is like try to create some kind of diverse letter forms. And play around with the location of these things. So the interesting thing about using the tracking is that if you want to affect a letter, like the spacing of a particular letter, you actually have to select the letter before it. Or you can make a selection of a whole word, you know, and modify the tracking for all of the pieces. But yeah, it's generally the letter before it. And so see, with my example here, notice how I moved over this the spacing of the K so that it's like inside, right? And this is all still type. It's not shapes yet. So if you were designing for like a caption, you know, or like titles, you're using a lot of type for type, not type for image. Things like this could be nice, but then like the spacing between the C and the L, even though it's legible, like you can I guess you kind of can still read this even though it's creative. What then ends up being more annoying is that there's a lot of space now between the L and the E, right? Like, as well as the I and the C. So letter spacing, as you modify it, you might have to, you know, tweak additional other pieces so that it doesn't look off, you know? Like you don't want to have something that looks like it could be two different words. You know what I mean? Everything, this is all, you're able to modify all of this like in the type itself, not actually changing anything but the type. So it's kind of an interesting way to approach design. A lot of people, they do this for a living, you know, like layout design and graphic design. Think about all these like typography kind of based design magazines that I gave you guys examples for. So anyhow, hopefully you guys adjusted a few things here. I just want one more different letter. Yeah. Ooh, where'd it go? Yeah. So after you guys get a couple things, we're gonna keep moving on here. The next thing we want to note is that we are dealing with type. This is not vectors yet. Like if we went to view outline again to see the vectors, it just gives you a preview, but it's really that line, like the baseline the letters are on. That's really the only like vector component here. To be able to get this into another way to see this is like if you hold, man, I'm talking too fast. If you select this type now, this type box with your selection tool, the black one, and you hold the command key or control on Windows, you'll see the baseline there. That's the only thing. We don't see individual points like we did in the pen tool practice, right? We have to convert this from the smart object into vectors. And so this next step is something that you guys are gonna have to do dozens of times. It's probably something to write down or be aware of where this is at. With any object that's selected, like an image or type, and you wanna transform this into vectors, we need to go to Object and Expand. It's gonna be time and time again. This is like one of the big go-tos for this program. And some things might not give you the option to expand. It might only give you expand appearance. And then in that regard, you could expand the appearance first. And then you have the option to expand into a full object. It's a little finicky, but after you do it a few times, you might grasp it. So expanding this, we just hit OK on this, the expand option. Now, if we hold Command, we actually can see all of the vector points or control, right? So if we were to deselect this and reselect, like if we want to drag this letter S or whatever, one of your letters, everything's going to move together. Even if we deselect and then reselect, everything's grouped. By default, after you expand something, whatever was encapsulated in that object is going to be all together in that expanded version, even if it's multiple colors or whatever. So what you'd have to do is go up to object again, since we're dealing with object structuring here, and we have to go to ungroup. So now if we deselect and go back in, everything is individualized, right? And you have the option to scale things, right? Move everything around, do whatever you want. So we can get kind of close with some stuff if we have a specific idea with type, designing it out. Like this is pretty specific, right? If I wanted to make all of this using one font and then expanding it and then modifying it to get to this point, it would take a long time, right? So it is beneficial to play around with some of those type features if you wanted to focus sternly on creating some kind of visually interesting components. From this point on, we're going to go back into this notion of dealing with vector points from this object that we generated from a smart object, right? So, you could be making your own objects, or we quite literally could be allowing Illustrator to make objects for us. The point is that either way we get to that endpoint, we have the vectors that we can manipulate. And there's all these different tools that we can be blurring and moving and twisting and all these different things, changing colors, adding gradients. The building blocks of all of this, though, are these vector points. And that's the main focus today, is really grasping how to deal with this. So I want you guys to pick a letter that has like a curved bottom, click on it, and then kind of zoom in. We're gonna focus down towards the bottom here. The one point I want us to really now shift to is this notion that we have this selection tool that we've been using to be able to like select and move around a shape. But we also have this other selection tool. It's called the direct selection tool. They're equally important in this program. You should be using both almost equally. There are shortcut keys for these. I use them, without thinking about it now. So if we grab this direct selection, as soon as we do, if we had something selected, you'll now see that all these vector points are viewable, right? But if we were to click and drag on one, we're moving the whole object, right? But if we were to click on one and let go without moving our mouse, right? Like just click and let go, you'll notice that we get the Bezier curves come out, and all of the other vector points are whitened out. They're hollow. They're no longer selected, meaning whatever you have individually selected is then what we are modifying. And yeah, you can click and drag it, move it around, or since that's already selected, you could use like your cursor keys and you can move this around. Just like any other selection process, if we were to do like a shift and select a second anchor point while holding shift, both of those will be grouped together. They can now be moved around together, right? Or we can click and drag over a multitude of different points, right? And then move all of those points all together, depending on which pieces of the puzzle that we just took. You see how we're dealing with like this sub layer? Like this is the building blocks of this object, and we're in there modifying with the direct selection. We're directly modifying these vector points. So the final point of this process is acknowledging that just because we created this either manually with the pen tool or, you know, automatically through a process using the program, we're not just left with having to modify these vectors that are there. We have the option to remove or add vectors to this existing path, or in this case, this existing object. So if you wanted to follow through the tutorial in the sense of trying to replicate a letter that's dripping, which is the next kind of phase, the first thing we would want to do is add a few more vector points to the bottom of the letter form. So let's see, I'm going to switch over to one that's not yet defined so well, like this one. You would click on an individual anchor point and kind of change the curve of the Bezier, or grab the Bezier curve to change the form of the shape, kind of manipulate some of these other shapes. But what ends up happening is, like, you don't get a ton of flexibility. It's kind of locked in, and you really have to really drag these curves out further than you should have to. So in this case, at least what you see for my example, you would want to be adding a few extra points in there so we have additional ability to modify. And so what we could do is go back to the pen tool, but instead of just the basic pen tool, we want to be able to do an add point tool. And actually, even though I just have the basic pen tool selected, because this shape is already selected, if I hover onto the outside edge of the path, you'll see that I get that little plus arrow, right? So if we click, we get an additional vector point. In the past, you really would have to go up and have the add anchor point tool, and then go to the path location, right? Which is fine. It's kind of a quick way of like, oh, if you're hovering there with a regular pen tool, that must mean you want to add a point, right? Or with the regular pen tool, if you hover over an existing point, it gives you the option to erase it or like subtract it. Just like there is a subcategory of the pen tool called delete anchor point tool. It's kind of just like everything's nested within the pen tool now. Or when the pen tool is selected, you could do like the plus or minus on the keyboard to toggle between them, or go back to P. But really, it's all like automated now with just the regular pen tool. So the point here is to add maybe a couple extra and then see how you can manipulate it further from that. Once you start to get into a bunch of points, like I'm gonna add a ton here and then go back to the direct selection. And I'm gonna zoom in further so I can see more detail. Like now, if I wanna get something going, it's like potentially too many points to be manipulating. You know, there's a fine line between like too many points and too little points. And you kind of just have to base those needs off of your individual objects you're making. So the point here is to kind of get some semblance of like a letter that looks like it could be dripping, right? That's what we're kind of looking to do. Now this last point of the pen tool, like the cherry on top, if you will, is specifically talking about instances like this, where there's either two straight edges or just one, right? Like I have a curved anchor point on one side of this anchor, but I don't have a curved line on the other. Well, what if I want this to be a curved piece on both sides and not just on one? You could delete it and add a new one and move it. That's kind of, you know, out of the way. We actually have a pen tool option called anchor point tool. And so an anchor point tool allows you to convert a point from having these Bezier curves to not having these Bezier curves back and forth. So in this instance, if I want to have it on both sides, I would click and drag out, and then I would have arms created. Or if I want to not have curves, I could just click on it on a point once, and it'll reduce it to having, you know, back to what it was before. And then there is this new feature in CC that it gives you like this quick modification, these little quick modification spots, right? Like when you're in the direct selection mode, you get these little like circles with a dot on them. That is kind of the same premise, although it gives you additional kinds of information about how you round that corner out. It's kind of unnecessary, but if you decide you might prefer that, it is kind of a quick way. You know, if it's a sharp corner and you're like, oh, I want to get it, but I don't want to change the tool, you literally can just grab and pull or whatever. So, you know, they add things here and there. Questions on modifying an existing shape? There's a lot of points we covered already. No pun intended. Okay, so going back into this notion of creating our own vector content, I want you guys to turn on rulers, because then we're going to be able to use some guides real quick. So I like to just turn rulers on by Command R or Control R. That'll pop them up. Rulers, you could right click and change the measurement, right? Like if you want it to be presented in what format. But rulers, by having those there, you're able to click on the ruler and drag, and you could drag down a guide. So I want you guys to drag a guide down below the shape that you're dripping, and then drag one over to where the dripping is and let go. And then we're going to zoom into that crosshairs just a little bit. It could be helpful to deselect your object and then zoom in, right? It's nice that Photoshop and Illustrator now, they zoom into whatever your selection is. That's been a feature on InDesign for a long time, but it could be annoying in some instances like this. So once we have these guides here, and just note that guides are under view. So we could either hide them or unlock them if we wanted to like move them around, or if we wanted to delete them. We have those options under view. So in this current state, we want to use them to create a new shape using the pen tool. And we want to make 3 points. That's all we're going to do. The first and last point is just a single click and let go. And the 2 in between points, they're going to be curved points, like a click and drag, right? So the first one at the top, like on the center line here, we're going to click and let go. Then we're going to come down to the right onto our line and click and drag down a bit. Doesn't have to be perfect. And let go. And then we don't have to make one here in the middle. We could, but there's really no need, because as soon as we go over to this side and we click and drag, we are already getting that curved line to come down. We click and drag up. And now the last point, we just click and let go. And so this is all, it's going to look different for everybody. The point is that we're only making 3 clicks to make this shape. And then from this point on, if we want it to be a little bit adjusted, we just go back again, just like we were doing with the, you know, our text shapes. We can modify some of these points so that perhaps it's a little bit more resembling of our ideal, you know, droplet, right? And then we can go ahead and go to view guides, hide guides, clear guides, whatever, get those out of there. Zoom out a bit. And if we go to our selection tool, we should be able to move this kind of in place, shrink it down, turn it, whatever we want to do. We could go to edit, copy, edit, paste. For pasting, we have a lot of nice options now, and you guys should really play around with these, like pasting in place. I love to mess around with this kinds of stuff. But if we paste, we could bring another one over here, quickly change the scale, rotate it, whatever, put it in a different spot, right? We only have to make one drip once, then we can modify it and copy it and do whatever we want to do. For you pro users, if you are used to using these programs a bit, what I like to do instead of copy paste is just hold the option tool. And when you hold the option tool and you're hovering over an object that you've selected, you'll see that your cursor turns into from a transformation cursor into like this copy and paste kind of icon. And so if you click and drag, you could basically copy it to wherever you want it to land. It's pretty awesome. There's a ton more stuff. For instance, if I want to take this S here and hold Shift and copy and drag it up, right? I don't have to do that. If I want to repeat that a bunch of times, I don't have to keep doing that. There's things like, if I copy it again, there's Command D, where's D? It's not under here. Oh, transform again, Command D. So it goes over, and there's shortcuts for this stuff. So you could do like Command C, Command D. And you could just keep repeating this. There's all these awesome tips and tricks you could do for like creating content. And I know that it just takes time. A lot of the stuff that I show you guys, like I've learned just playing around with this for years. So I try to just keep you guys on track with the stuff that really is beneficial, like this really minute management of vectors, right? Being able to see vectors, being able to go in with your direct selection and modify these vector points, right? And we will be able to, and Monday, we're going to get into like more specifics on fusing objects together or cutting objects out of one another, right? Like making our own tools, so to speak, kind of solving these more complex ideas or problems that we might have, and like how to implement them in a vector format. So we're not quite there yet. We only have a few minutes. So I want to show you one more tool, then I'll let you guys play around and any questions that we might have. So last tool that I covered in the other class, pretty close to same timing, is the warp tool. So if you drag that out, it should be right here on the side, right? These are just different kind of like shape modification tools. So the warp tool, if you don't have it, you just go under edit toolbar, you got to drag it out. I could recap that if anybody needs a question. And then based on whatever shape you have selected, like if I don't have a shape selected, can I still do this? Yes, but it's only going to modify the first shape that I click on. It's object by object. And so say maybe I want to, oh, weird, look at it, it's actually doing more than one now. Why did it only do one to begin with? Oh, I see. Wait, maybe not. Weird. I don't use these very often. I'm not very specific with these. So it looks like it just depends for some reason. Like clicking on the object versus clicking on the path doesn't really seem to make a ton of difference. It does look like if you do specify clicking on a path when you drag, it really will only affect that one side of the path more so. If you click in the middle of the shape, it looks like it's going to affect, you know, both sides kind of more simultaneously. I just find it kind of confusing that if I start over here and click, I could affect, yeah, now it's only doing 2. Now it's doing, skipping the K. I don't know the rhyme or reason to this, but either way, the point is that it's more quickly allowing you to modify a shape based on like a smudge tool or something, right? If you wanted a little bit more specifics on the tool, you could double click on the tool in the toolbar, and you have some more options in terms of, you know, some of the details. I want to be less specific. What else? Some of these other things like the twist tool, you click on it and it shifts it. Ooh, this is fun. I didn't realize this until just now. Any of these warp tools or stuff, you know, in Photoshop, how I was telling you guys, you could use the brackets to change like the size of a brush head. You can't do that here. But what's interesting is you could hold down the options key and you can change that by just moving the mouse. So either the width or the height or combination of both, you know, like, oh, I want something really tall. And then that'll work for that. Same thing with like the warp tool, you know. So obviously, a lot of this is going to be trial and error kinds of stuff. Most of the time when you're affecting type specifically, you don't want to be too absurd with the drastic changes that you're making, because for this project anyhow, you really want to still be able to read most of the type that you're doing. Not necessarily all the type. It just depends on your needs, I suppose. So yeah, beyond this, you guys have any questions? Get in here, change colors on stuff, start playing with strokes, basic kinds of stuff. Tool. You know, you could use the gradient tool and click on something, change the gradient color. Gradient's kind of complex. I think we actually cover it next class maybe, so maybe we'll just hold off on that. Yeah. But yeah, question?
Yeah, so like, you know, in Photoshop, how they have the history tab. So like if you make a mistake, you can just go back to where it was before.
Right.
Is there a way to do it on here?
No, I don't think there's a history, no. No. Oops. Pickles. So obviously there's tons of wiggle room to explore and stuff, but we're going to get more into that next class. I really want to make sure we're focusing on the nitty gritty elements. And then, so we have some basic understanding of that. And then on Monday, we're going to deal with more of the like oh, now that you guys will have concept built out from next class, Monday will be like, oh, how do we start structuring that using these more intricate tool features? Like Pathfinder is a big one. I'm going to be covering quite a bit. I should probably just add that. I'm going to add that. Must use Pathfinder in your project. I'm adding that as a requirement. Cool. Yeah, if you guys want to stick around and ask me questions, more than welcome. If you guys have questions on project 1, if you need help, you know, this is the last hour coming up to get help. So
Yeah, I just had some questions about my project for
project 1.
Project 1, yeah.
Okay.
Is screen share enabled for me?
It is, but one second. I just want to see, does anybody else have project 1 stuff? Okay. I like to get a general idea, because if nobody seems like they're going to come to my office hour, I'm not going to like sign on and walk.
Right.
Checking in.
Yeah, I just wanted to know how to like export it again, like just get a recap of it really quickly.
Photoshop?
Yeah. Like for I think you said we have to do one for the Photoshop file and then another one for like the image file or something like that.
Yeah,
I just needed a recap for that.
Yep.
All right.
Let's see. We'll open up this. I need some water. Yeah, I'll cover this real quick, and then Alexander, we can dive into yours. You have time, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we just cover it now. So saving PDF, right? That's one of them. We just go to save as, and you title it as whatever, your name, whatever. And then under format, we're going to choose Photoshop PDF. And we don't need layers. That's kind of like if you're sharing with somebody and they're going to open it in another raster graphics program and they might need to have those layers separated. I just want it as like a backup way of viewing. And then also potentially to save. So we hit save. Then there's going to be a second dialog box for setting the specifics of the export. And the only thing I want you guys to really worry about is press quality file, press quality PDF. If you wanted to also save a little bit more file size, we could also turn off preserve Photoshop editing capabilities, which is on the same screen. It's like, you know, it's not like you're digging around to find that. It's right there. Then you just hit save. Right. So that's the Photoshop or the PDF option. And then the save for web. The first thing that, well, actually, you don't need to do that anymore. We would go to File, and then Export, Save for Web Legacy. It used to be just called Save for Web right next to Save, but Save for Web Legacy. So when we open this up, you want to have the 2 up, right? Like you're going to see original, just one preview, but then you want the 2 up to be there, because then you can see the original compared to your newly created version. And the point here is just to like reduce it down so it still retains decent quality. You know, you could zoom in, you could hit Command 0 to zoom out. Basically, if you just take this view here and up underneath of the preset options, you can change it from maximum, which right now is pretty high file size, not super high, but to something lower, right? That's much lower, like we're talking 250K or less or something, right? So still retains, if I zoom out, it's still going to retain the full quality really that it should, but the file size is dramatically less. And that's what I look for is like, oh, yeah, you submitted a JPEG. Is it press quality or is it just a JPEG, right? And so when you hit save, also to note real quick, when you are saving that preset of a save for web, since your original file for these projects is super large, right? Because we have it 300 DPI, you might actually want to adjust the image size here as well first. Because right now this image looks like it's only 106 pixels by, or 1006 by 1080. Your guys is probably like way more, you know? So by reducing this down first to say around 1,000 pixels width or 1,000 pixels height, like really all you need to view in a computer screen, you know, like if I were to look at your image on my website down the road, like 1,000 pixels is going to be like the max I'm going to set it to. That's all you need to view it on web. Once you set that, you know, so say if you have 20,000 right now, the image size automatically just jumps up 3 times the size, right? So by changing that first and moving, then you might be able to then decide like, oh, how much quality can I pack in there? That's the general consensus. It's kind of annoying, but it is helpful to really grapple if you're going to keep continuing like generating digital content. So good.
All right. Yeah, I think I got it. I'm gonna go ahead and try it out, and then if I do mess up with anything, then I'll probably just email you. All right? Is that fine, or should I just stay on the Zoom call?
It's up to you. I mean, I'm going to be saving this video and exporting it. So.
Oh yeah. So
there's also
yeah, then I can just watch it back.
there's a couple times I did record it. So cool.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I'm going to stop my recording. That's all general specifics.